This is the Strike Mash Boil podcast, presented by the Merrimack Valley Home Brew Club. This week we do a deep dive on the English bitter. We taste some commercial samples and homebrew and tell you why it's awesome.
Welcome back to Strike Mash Boil. I'm Marco, president of Merrimack Valley Home Brew Club, and I'm joined by my co-host, Phil.
Hey, so this week we've got a completely different show. We're going to dive into a specific beer style, review a series of commercial examples alongside some homebrew examples, and we're going to call this edition the Bitter Off.
So joining us for this is the doc, Nick. Welcome back.
Good to be here.
Phil, all right, you got to help me out here. What the hell do you have lined up for us? What's the Bitter Off?
All right, so a few weeks ago, we gave Spyglass a hard time about their English-style bitter. They posted on social media. It looked pretty murky. It was pretty dark, not appetizing. And we got some feedback that maybe we were a bit harsh, especially because we made most of our comments on looks alone. Well, recently, an even more famous IPA brewery named Bissell Brothers posted on social media a video about their new English-style bitter that also looked murky as fuck. And this was being released in a nitro can to give that pub-style pour. And based on recent photos of the beer on Untapped, the Hayes boys are going to fucking love this beer just on looks. Fortunately for us, Joe, Mr. Lactose, was able to grab a couple 4-packs of that beer for us so we can actually taste this one. So then I swung through the packy, picked up a few imported British bitters, and to make it even more fun, Nick and I both have fresh homebrew-style bitters. So sitting in front of us, we have 5 beers split into 2 sets. First up, we have the Pale Bitters, both in nitro cans. The first one is the Bissell Brothers Oi nitro can, and the other is the classic Boddington's Pub Ale with the nitro widget. And in the second set, we have some ordinary bitter, a ordinary bitter, and 2 best bitters. One of the best bitters is the classic Fuller's London Pride, and the other 2 are homebrews from me and Nick. I got a best bitter, and Nick has an ordinary bitter. So before we dig in, Nick, why don't you walk us through BJCP category for these guys, which I believe is 11 British bitter.
Nick, don't do that yet. A couple of things. Phil, I'm proud of you, buddy. I want you to know I'm proud. I'm going to tell you why I'm proud of you, because folks that have been listening to the episodes know that you tend to hesitate when calling out breweries for the bullshit that they put in front of us, and you named both of them today. So I feel like you've grown, pal. This is a huge moment for you. So great job.
Thank you.
And I got to tell you, though, Nick, you're going to have to help out folks that, category 11, because I heard Phil say bitter like 46 times in that intro, and there's best bitters, ESBs, ordinary bitters. Is just fucking bitters all over the place. So you're going to have to clean this up for us, because I'm already lost.
Absolutely. Well, bitter is the name of the game for this category. British bitter is one of those styles that's really hard to find here in the United States. A brewery that brews this type of beer, mostly because it's usually a fairly low alcohol, low carbonated beer made with mostly traditional English ingredients. So it's not exactly the most popular style here in the United States. We love our big brash beers, obviously. But if you can find a brewery that brews these types of beers, it is absolutely golden. You found a great brewery. This is it can be a difficult style to brew. But before we do that, let's just go into a couple of the subcategories of category 11. So as Phil had mentioned, there's ordinary bitter, there is best bitter, and then there's strong bitter. So the differences between the 3 are relatively minor. There's some differences in the ingredients, but generally the differences between them are just alcohol and the original gravity. So for all of these beers, basically you want to use traditional English ingredients if you can. Some of these beers you can make with American hops, but you generally want to do more traditional British ingredients or English ingredients. So this includes, for the malt, you want something like Maris Otter or Golden Promise that's going to give you a little bit more character than something like a traditional clean American 2-row. For the hops, you want to try and do English, East Kent Goldings, Fuggles. There's a whole bunch of them. You can go American, but you want to keep it light. You don't want something to be over the top. This isn't an American pale ale. Remember, this is an English bitter. It's a little bit more balanced. And then in front of the yeast, which is probably the most important, you want a yeast that's going to be very expressive, that's going to give off a lot of esters. So ale yeast, something like the London ale, the dry English ale. You have a lot of options you can use that. It's going to produce some really great character. So all these beers, all these substyles, they're generally light amber to copper in color. They have the pale malt, maybe a little bit of amber malt or toasted malt. They're generally going to be balanced more towards the bitter end, which is why they're called bitters. So the idea is that you have this delicate malt profile, but then you have that bitter finish that makes you want to drink more and more. So that's really the key to kind of get that balance right. They generally want to go more towards the bitter end, but at the same time, not as bitter as something like an American Pale Ale or an American IPA. So you kind of want to find that balance right. And if you look at the guidelines, it kind of gives you a good idea where you want to stand. The other hallmarks about this beer, while in competitions, obviously we're getting them in bottles, they're carbonated. If you really want to have this beer and have it shine, try and find it on cask or drink it off of cask. Carbonation really kills this style. Again, we're talking about low alcohol, delicate beers. Carbonation just really wipes away all those kind of trademarks of the beer and really washes them out. So lower the alcohol, the better. I think that about sums it up. Again, all three subcategories are a little bit different based off the ingredients. The strong bitter is probably the most different because that can go up to like 6.5%. And so at that point, the bitter component and the malt component are actually pretty well balanced. In fact, most people say a strong bitter is the most balanced beer out there. It's very, very balanced, while the other two are going to be more leaning on the bitter side as far as that malt bitterness goes.
You said something that I'm sure is going to perk up a lot of people's ears, especially newer home brewers or people that are, the haze boys out there. When you start talking about cask beer, cask beer is pretty well known, but I'd say, there's lots of home brewers that aren't that familiar with it. And you said low to no carbonation. People like, I'm sure folks are like, the fuck is this guy talking about? Flat beer. And yeah, I mean, cask beer is essentially low carbonation, but not low carb, but it's not keto. So low carbonation beer. That's cool, not cold. In America, people are used to these super cold, higher effervescent beers. An IPA is not so much high effervescence, but definitely cold beers. That is just, this is a very different take on beer, and we love it, which is why we're doing this. And we're going to, it's Monday night, I need an excuse to drink 5 beers. So why not do a bitter off, right? And so I think that this is great for us, but for folks out there, like if you order cask, just be prepared. It's going to be a little bit warmer and it's going to probably be pretty flat. But when you're a true, pure beer enthusiast, this is what we call real ale.
Absolutely. And I mean, you really nailed the point about temperature. Again, same thing. These are delicate beers. They have delicate components, aromas, and tastes. And the warmer the beer is, the more that's going to come out. So it's something to be prepared for. But this is how the English used to drink their beers all the time. I think in England, if you go there now, you have a lot more variety. There's a lot more IPAs now. I mean, that's always the most popular beer to drink anyway. But if you can find a pub or somewhere that's pouring traditional cask beer that's warm. I don't like to use the word flat. That sounds insulting. It will have a little bit of carbonation, and also warm is probably insulting as well. Yeah, it's going to be around 50, 55 degrees, so a bit warmer than a normal beer on tap. A little lower carbonation, and the whole idea is drinkability. This beer is all about drinkability. You drink a lot of this beer. It's low alcohol, low carbonation. You can slam pint after pint. This is what you do. This is what this beer is for.
Well, I've got 5 pints to slam tonight. So Phil, we're separating this, right? We're going to do a couple of them first, and then we're going to dive into the other 3 after, right?
Yeah, we're going to start with the 2 that are on nitro, which is the Boddingtons and the Bissell Brothers.
All right, I got to crack these bad boys open now. They have widgets in the cans. Which means they're going to
does. Bissell Brothers does not.
Oh, Bissell doesn't. Okay, so all right, so it should be interesting because I know with the widget, Guinness does the widget, so I should hear something a little bit different upon opening it.
So for those who don't know what a widget is, so it's this little plastic ball that they put in a can, and when they package the can, they throw in nitrogen in it, and as the beer is canned and it's pressurized, what happens is the pressure will force beer actually into this little ball, this little widget, because it has like these little tiny holes that are drilled into it. So as soon as you crack open the beer, all that CO2 that's inside the ball and the beer will come rushing out, and create the bubbles and that cascading effect as you pour it into the glass itself. So that's the purpose of that widget, to sort of kind of show you, or to mimic, that's the word I'm looking for, mimic the whole nitrogen pour that you get from something like a Guinness.
And so we want to pour these pretty aggressive too.
Yes, you do.
All right, let me do this. Ooh. All right, so that was Oi.
Yeah, while you're doing that, if for those listeners out there, if you are in the UK and you go to a pub and you're looking for real ale, you want to look for the cask marquee. It's a sign that is usually posted outside of a pub, and that is a sign that they not only do real ale, but they have been certified by the camera and to serve the best pint around.
One more note. So nitrogen is different than cask. So let's
Correct.
keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Nitrogen, yeah, exactly. So nitrogen gas is a way to sort of mimic the cask effect. Basically, nitrogen bubbles are smaller than CO2 bubbles. So when you have them in a beer, you get a much more smoother taste. If you ever had Guinness on nitrogen, or from a nitrogen tap, you know that velvety texture that you get with that. And you can do that with something like a English bitter that we have here in Boddington's. It's not that uncommon, but it's sort of supposed to kind of mimic the whole cask. That sort of, again, it's not flat, but sort of that lower carbonation, that sort of that texture that you get.
All right, I'm going to open the Boddingtons and kind of hold it a little bit close to the microphone and hope this thing doesn't explode on me, so that folks can maybe hear what it sounds like when you're opening one with a widget. So let's see.
That was really fucking good, man.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's loud. It's that nitrogen.
It's like I feel like a gun went off. I got to tell you though, I opened obviously both of them, and I'm going to take the looks out of it for a second. That Bissell Brothers beer, I don't know if you guys have experienced this with yours. It smelled hardcore sulfur pouring out of that can. Like it punched me right in the face, sulfur, as it poured out. Now it's sort of aired out a little bit, but right out of that can, I'm like, holy crap, this smells like I just ripped a huge one in my office here.
That's interesting. I didn't get that. I got a lot of, it definitely smells like, so when I first saw this can, I just thought it was going to be the typical Americanized version of a bitter. So basically, low alcohol, but they're going to add American hops to it. That's a thing that happens, and it can be fine, but it's not what I would call traditional. But when I smelled this, they're definitely using some English hops in here, because it's quite,
for sure.
It's fruity, so you get maybe some of that Americanized version of the hops, and maybe there is. It's fruity, but it's also quite herbal as well. You don't get a lot of citrus. The fruitiness is more apple and other stone fruits. It's pretty interesting.
I'm convinced that Phil's favorite hop in the entire world is in this thing, which is Fuggles.
It might be, because I do get some earthiness in it. So
I hate Fuggles.
And I got to tell you, like there's such a stark difference in how these two beers look. When we started talking about the Spyglass bitter, there's a lot of things that we didn't like about what they posted, and mainly because it didn't look like a bitter, but it just, the lighting was bad. It looked really murky. It looked really flat. It looked flat. Like, we're not talking low carbonation. It looked still. So there was a bunch of issues we had with it. Then Bissell Brothers comes out with theirs, and they take better pictures, or they took a better picture of theirs, but it's still fucking hazy as hell beer.
Yeah,
and this looks like it's dry hopped.
Well, that's what I thought. It smells like it's dry hop.
Yeah,
there's definitely a hop nose on that, and I suspect it's that. I suspect it's probably their yeast they're using too. I can't imagine they're using a yeast that crashes out that fast. But I will say the Boddingtons, it's gorgeous, but I can't help but think, I wonder if they filter that beer, because it is. I don't know if I've ever seen that clear of a beer. That's insane.
It's absolutely filtered or run through a centrifuge or one of those things. A lot of British breweries do that. Their goal is to, even in cask, they will find the cask and to drop it bright. Hence a bright tank, bright beer is huge to them. So it's definitely been filtered or run through a centrifuge before packaging.
Now I've already tasted the two of them, and I immediately have a preference, and I'm not going to say what it is quite yet. But Nick, you're our guy. You're the national BJCP judge. I'm seeing, because I can see you. You've tasted both of them at this point. What do you think?
Yeah, so I guess one thing I failed to mention, what's really interesting about British bitters, even though there's that bittering component, believe it or not, oftentimes there isn't much of a hop flavor in these beers. And that's one thing when I first tried the Boddingtons, the first thing that came to mind, it's like there's that bitterness. There really isn't any hop flavor in it. It's just that grain malty sweetness, and then you have that bitterness that kind of finishes the beer fairly dry. So this is just, I mean, the Boddington is just classic English bitter. I mean, you can't really say anything bad about it. It's, it's really, really good. It's not the most flavorful bitter in the world. You don't get a whole lot of maybe fruity esters from the yeast. They're probably using something very clean. But Boddington's also, I'm assuming it's owned by some conglomerate. So I'm not surprised that you're not getting, okay. Yes. I'm not surprised you're not getting something really interesting, but at the same time, I mean, it's classic. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Yeah,
and to what you said earlier, so it obviously has a bitterness that is unmistakable, right? So it's there, but it makes you want to go back. Like I finish it finishes dry. I feel like, oh, I need more. Like it's something that I could drink pints of and feel like I could just keep drinking it and never have my thirst quenched, because it just makes me want to go back to it.
Absolutely. And because it's a low alcohol beer, it's not that filling. So, I mean, you can just keep going back to it. I mean, it's like, you don't have to think about it. You just drink it for hours upon hours, and you'd probably be fine at the end of the night.
Yeah. This is, I don't know if I've said this on this podcast, but I often reference the wise words of Carl Metzemaker from our club, who says that, sometimes we just like to drink beer, not sip beer. And these are the kinds of beers that you drink. You can have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them and feel pretty good about it. Like if a beer like this has me constantly going back to it and it's 8%, my wife's not going to be happy, because I'm going to, she'll be watching the kids. I'm going to be passed out on the floor. It's not going to be a good night for me. But for this, I feel like I can have a marathon football game and not have this total alienating style of beer that I'm going to get sick of. Like I could just drink it the whole time.
All I think about it when I drink this is watching a movie where there's a scene in a pub, a bunch of rowdy people are watching soccer, and they're just drinking pint after pint. I mean, that's what this, or football, I guess, to be proper.
What do they call them? Soccer hooligans?
Yeah, soccer hooligans. Yeah, absolutely.
Football hooligans. All right, so then talk to us about Oi.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting beer.
Very different than
very different. Yeah, I mean, looks alone. Obviously, while they say this beer was on nitrogen, there's no widget, so when you poured it in the glass, you didn't get that cascading effect like you do with the Boddingtons.
And so nitrogen, does CO2 dissolve in beer? Is that what it does? Absorb in beer? Nitrogen doesn't do that. So nitrogen sits around the beer, right?
Well, it does dissolve, but it comes out of solution much faster than the CO2.
I think the pressure you need, like, I guess a brewery could do it, but you need like special equipment that will actually push enough pressure to get the nitrogen to infuse with the beer, whatever the hell that's called. And so like the Boddingtons is low carb, right? Low carbonation. So
for sure.
I can tell that it's a nitrogen beer. I feel like with the Bissell beer, that I feel like it's much higher carbonation, that it would almost suggest to me that it was maybe conditioned in some fashion, or even force carved with a little bit of CO2 and then canned with nitrogen. Did they say that?
Yeah, they say that it was canned with nitrogen.
But they don't say that they carbonated it with CO2 first?
I mean, you'd have to get it carbonated, but they didn't go into any details on.
I think both beers were carbonated. But
just at really different levels.
Yeah, but I mean, even the Boddingtons was carbonated. It's also has a bunch of nitrogen in it, and when we have the nitrogen, it really flushes everything out. I mean, I think that's one of the goals of that. But yeah, the Bissell Brothers, I mean, you can just look at the foam and the head, completely different. The Boddingtons is, it almost looks like that crema you get on a nice espresso or a latte, right? It's a very thick, dense head from the nitrogen bubbles. While the Oi, again, it just looks like a traditional head you get from a pale ale, which is fine. Fluffy, it looks great. great lacing, but quite different than the Boddingtons. And again, the OI doesn't have that widget in it. So even though they did say it was pressurized with nitrogen, I don't know if it really had a big effect or had an effect that they thought it would, because when I poured it, I didn't see that cascading effect like I saw with the Boddingtons.
The flavor profile, talk about that, because it is so different. Yeah, so I'll let you talk about it if you want to describe it.
Yeah. It's definitely, there's a lot of hop flavor in this beer compared to the Boddingtons. It's night and day. A lot of hop flavor. The hops in the OI, much fruitier, a little bit herbal, but they definitely, that hop flavor is definitely there.
Is it appropriate? Is it over the top? It seems over the top.
It probably is, but if you look at the guidelines, the guidelines do allow some flexibility as far as hop flavor. I think you can say low to moderate or low to moderate high. This could fit in there, but I have to admit it's getting pretty close to like an American Pale Ale for me. Just the bitterness and that hop flavor, it's pretty high, and I think it hides some of those really nice malt flavors. I mean, that's the problem when you do that. You sort of hide those. What they use, Phil? Like they use Golden Promise,
Golden Promise, and Maine grown oats.
Yeah, those are really delicious, delicate flavors that are going to get lost in a beer like that with all that hop. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting that I think this plays into what you guys have heard me talk about, you guys have heard us talk about on this show. We have a brewery that is renowned at this point for their New England IPA game. Like, these guys have been, when they release Swish, people line up. They go bananas for their New England IPAs. They've started doing some distribution. You'll see it in some package stores here in Massachusetts now. This is a prime example of somebody who's stepping outside of their norms and trying a different style of beer, and you can just taste their influence in it. This is not a classic style of an English bitter, and it's not that it's a bad beer, because I don't think it's a bad beer. It doesn't look that great when you know what it is. If you told me this was an English Pale Ale, even an English IPA, I'd be like, I kind of see it. But you can just tell it has that American IPA brewery influence that just has me a little bit disappointed. It's a little off balance for what I expect, because I'm expecting a bitter. It's just not. I totally prefer the Boddingtons to this.
So Phil, maybe you can comment on this. I think you may have this information. So according to the can, this is Nitro Pub Ale. Do they advertise this as British or English at all, or is that just what our imagination?
No, they do advertise it as inspired by an English beer, specifically from their annual trips to the UK. And I forget where I saw it on their website or on their might have been on their Instagram, but they did call it a bitter.
Okay, yeah. I mean, whenever I see the word inspired, a big red flag goes up. It just means that, oh yeah, this is our inspiration, but we're going to throw a ton of American hops in it. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, on the side of the can, it says this beer has been dosed with liquid nitrogen to recreate the creamy head and smooth drinkability of a proper British pint.
Oh, that's an interesting way to do it.
Liquid nitrogen, huh? I didn't even read the side of the can.
Yeah, it does say to shake the can gently, so maybe I fucked this up, because I did not shake the can. But...
I did shake it. I poured a can when I first got it, because I was like, okay, I got to try this, even though it's dry month for me. I'm going to drink it, and I shook it, and it looked just like this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they say to shake it, so if this thing had cleared out at all, it
would have
been right back in suspension anyway.
So I got one little note for you. You want to guess how much that Boddington's 4-pack cost?
4-pack. All right. So they're 16 ounces, although the can looks bigger than the Bissell can. The Bissell's a pint too. Yeah, Bissell's also a pint. It must be narrower. I don't know, $9.
And the Bissell Brothers?
Well, I know how much it is. I'm going to let Nick on that one.
It's got to be between $16 and $20.
So the Bissell Brothers was $15. Okay. And Redstone was selling the Boddingtons for $6.79 a 4-pack.
What?
Yeah. All right. So,
I mean, Anheuser-Busch InBev, right? So AB InBev. So there's a certain drop in price, probably because of the conglomerate level. But for less than $7, you can get a 4-pack of Boddingtons, double that price for the Bissell Brothers. For beers like this, and we've talked about this for lower gravity beers that other breweries make that are still in that $15. What am I paying $15 for?
Well, what is it? 4%, 4.5% is the OI, and
Boddington's is 4.7.
Yeah, I mean, what the fuck?
I can't remember the last time I paid less than $10 for any kind of 4-pack or 6-pack. I can't believe that price. That's just insane to me.
Yeah, but I mean, when you think about it, so it's clear that Bissell Brothers is just making this beer more expensive, right? I mean, they're putting a bunch of hops in this. Yeah. Which obviously is going to drive the cost up. Boddington's.
But they call out on their website that the hop they use is Willamette. That is not an expensive hop. We're not talking Citra. We're not talking, even Citra's not that expensive anymore. So let's go Galaxy, right? They're not putting Galaxy in this.
I'd imagine what was their oat? It's a local sourced oat.
Main oats, yeah, that's probably a little more expensive for the local.
And also, they're Bissell Brothers, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's sure. I have to admit, like, I think they're both. I think they're different enough where I don't think you can compare them. I really don't. I think they're completely different beers, and I think they're both solid for what they are. I like the Bissell Brothers. I actually, you know, maybe it came across I was shitting on them, but I really like the beer on its own. If I wasn't comparing to something else, I think it's a really solid beer and a pretty good price point for a Bissell Brothers beer. I'm actually pretty impressed by it. I think the whole nitro thing is a little gimmicky. I don't think that really came through. But the beer itself, it's different enough and still flavorful. And where else are you going to get a beer like this anywhere in this country? Like it's pretty unique, I think.
You know, I'm not shy to shit on a beer if I think a beer is garbage. I don't think that the Oi is a bad beer. I prefer Boddington's because I think Boddington's is more of what I was expecting when I'm having an English bitter. If I was drinking this on my own, I'd be totally happy. And if you told me it was an English pale or even an American pale, I'd be like, this is a pretty good beer. I'd be happy with it.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to our next three. If you like what you've been hearing on our show, hit that subscribe or follow button on your podcast service. And if you have any ideas or feedback for us, leave us a review or shoot us a DM on Instagram at StrikeMashBoil. Or join the conversation in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/MVHBC. Now let's do the next three beers. We're going to start with the Fuller's London Pride, which is a deep amber, bronze-colored beer. It's kind of the definitive, if you will, bitter that maybe like Timothy Taylor's Landlord. This one is very specific, and there are a lot of clone recipes out there. So it's Target, Challenger, Northdown hops, and that's very prominent, those three. Then we've got My Beer, which is also a best bitter, and it is also a clone of a London Pride. There's a lot of recipe development done into this one. Looked at a bunch of British cask ale forums, and this is actually based off of a photo of a Fuller's brewing log. And they actually do a Party Guile style brew where they do the ESB, then the London Pride, and then a third beer, their regular ordinary bitter. So I thought that was fascinating, the way they do those beers. And what was interesting, their brewing log called out pale chocolate, which none of the other clone recipes out there called out that pale chocolate. So that's in there. I didn't have Northdown hops, so it's just Target and Challenger, 3.8%. And the beer that we are drinking is actually cask conditioned, packaged for you guys. I don't know if that carbonation really held up when it got canned and brought to you, but I'm drinking it off of a cask, off of a beer engine. So sorry, guys. And the other one's Nick's Ordinary Bitter. Nick, why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this beer is sort of a combination of a couple recipes I came across. Basically, it's very simple, like most bitter recipes generally are. It's mostly, I want to say 80 to 90% floor malted Maris Otter. It has about a quarter pound of Victory malt to get sort of that biscuity character, cracker character. And then unfortunately, I didn't have any crystal malt so on brew day. So I used Care Munich 2 because that's what I had. And Care Munich 2, while it's technically it's a German crystal malt, it's not really a very strong crystal malt. And as the guys take a look at the color of this beer, it's pretty pale. If I used a traditional crystal malt, it would have been a lot more copper, like these other beers that we're taking a look at. So that was sort of the I guess the audible that I had to call on game day. The yeast itself is I think it's the Timothy Taylor yeast, and I Forgot what it's called, but I really like that yeast profile. I think it produces really nice fruity esters, really nice kind of that English character. And I think I dry hop this one too. So I dry hop this with a half an ounce of, the hops are all East Kent Goldings. So, and a pretty traditional bittering schedule. So bitter flavor, maybe a touch at flame out, and then like a half ounce that I dry hop, which is why when you look at it, it's not very clear. It has that haziness to it.
So you guys, the two of you have got to be feeling pretty confident about your beers if we have a classic example, London Pride, and we're putting your two homebrews up against it. I mean, like, Jesus, I can't wait to open these fuckers up and try them. But I'm surprised that you guys want to say, hey, yeah, let me throw mine in with the classic example.
To be fair, mine isn't compared to London Pride, so I'm not
trying to call out already.
And I'm drinking it for the first time side by side. I find the London Pride hops, the bitterness, to be very bright, very punchy, very prominent. Mine is a little lower. I think part of that might be a little bit of temperature. I think the London Pride's a little too cold. Mine was poured off a cask at 55 degrees, and it's been sitting around for a little over an hour.
So Phil, remind me, did you say that your beer is a relative clone of London Pride?
It's an attempt at a clone, yeah. So this is the first time I've ever brewed a bitter. I've done British golden ales, I've done milds, but this is my first bitter.
I remember reading something, this was years ago when I first started homebrewing, because I also was interested in cloning the London Pride, and there's been a lot of attempts on this. Apparently their fermentation schedule is insane. I don't know if you read about this or not. They start at one temperature, they drop it a couple degrees. 3 days later, they bump it up a couple degrees, and they drop it another 3 degrees a couple days later. And supposedly that's how they get that ester profile, which is very unique to London Pride. It really kind of shines through.
Timothy Taylor, there's actually some really great YouTube videos out there from Timothy Taylor. They talk about their brewing process and their fermentation. They're using cube-shaped fermentation vessels. They're doing open fermentation. And of course, they've got generations on their yeast that go back a long way compared to what we buy fresh. I just fermented at 68 and let it go as a 15-gallon batch. So Marco, you're actually sitting on 5 gallons of this in your basement somewhere.
Can't wait to break out the beer engine and have it on cask for myself. I will say what I'm learning from this pouring experience that I did just now is I will not be canning beer off the cask, because this thing is like a glass of water, still flat. But
do you want to start, Phil? Where do you want to start here?
Let's start with the London Pride. Let's start with the commercial example.
So even thinking back to the other two bitters that we did, it smells totally different. Like I get way more like fruity aromatics from this than I did from those other ones.
Yeah, I get a lot of caramel. Caramel flavor.
Too, yeah.
Especially a lot more compared to the others. The taste itself is where it really shines. The nose I kind of find sort of ordinary, but the taste, those hops and those esters, I mean, they just combine. They're just complete magic. I mean, it's a really great tasting beer.
Yeah, now you understand why I was saying it was bright. It's punchy. I
think that's what I mean by bright, I guess.
I don't know what words to use. I don't have the training that you have. It's just, to me, this is just so balanced and bright and punchy and in your face without being like an alchemist style hop profile, right? And it's not an American IPA. It's a very balanced maltiness, the caramel, all that.
Yeah, we were talking about this before we hit the record button. Just like you guys, it's been a long time since I've had London Pride, and I'm saying like, man, it's been too long since I've had London Pride, because this beer is fucking good.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic for a reason. It's just delicious. They really nail the balance between the caramel malt, the herbal, spicy hoppiness, and those fruity esters from their yeast. And it's, like I said, it's a great combination at, was it 4.7%? Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and also really different than the Boddingtons earlier, right? Mm-hmm. So it's obviously a different type of bitter, but does a lot of the same similar things that I thought that Boddingtons did, where it has that hit of bitterness that has me craving more. Like I take a sip and it has those really great esters, some of the fruity characters, the maltiness, but it finishes nice and bitter that has me just wanting to keep picking this glass up. And the London Pride is, what's the ABV on this?
4.7.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like another just crushable beer. I mean, that's standard strength, but it's a beer that I could drink several of them.
Yeah, and when it's on cask in the UK, it's a little lower. It's like 4.1 or somewhere around there. And I've had it in London in a pub, and oh man, on cask, it's a little creamier. Maybe those hops aren't nearly as punchy, but yeah, I mean, this is just a beer you want to keep going back for. Just you want to go back up when the glass is empty, go back up to the bar and, one more.
I will say this, I kind of prefer if it was a little bit lower alcohol. Like, I'm drinking this now, I'm like, yeah. I could sort of taste the alcohol in this, even though it's 4.7%. It's definitely bigger and a little bit more fuller. And I think I'd want it a little bit lower, personally.
That's an unfortunate part of a lot of these British beers. The Boddingtons, as well, is at an export strength. This, I would call it an export strength. When you're actually in pubs in the UK, all these beers are down lower, close to about 4%. They think that we Americans just want these big boozy beers, which is probably true. But you go to an event like NERAX, New England Real Ale Exhibition, and you actually get all these real ales. And they are, I mean, good luck. They definitely have stuff over like 5-6%. But I mean, out of maybe the 60 or 70 casks, it's probably less than 10 that are over 6%.
I don't know if this is true or not, but I always thought, and you guys can correct me, but I always thought the reason why it was slightly higher strength for an export beer was to survive the travel.
Yes, that's where I was going with that. I think that's why they do it. Yeah,
okay,
I mean, you sort of have to. I think trying to transport overseas and let it sit on warm shelves and butt nowhere, USA. 3% beer is not going to survive that. I mean, it's just going to be a mess at that point. So,
yeah, and Phil, sounds like you've had the pleasure, and I have not, of probably having this beer pretty fresh. It's got to be a whole different experience.
Cask ales are going to be even in pubs in the UK, they're probably only 3, maybe 4 weeks old. So very much like how we chase the freshest of the freshies on the IPAs. Over there, that's standard issue for their cask ales.
So sort of a recent phenomenon in the craft beer industry has been the transition from a can date to a best by date. Yeah. So is there a standard rule of thumb to track backwards from a best by date to know when this was produced?
I think it would probably be up to the brewer. Like Sam Adams has been doing that for a very, very long time, and I want to say their date is based on like 6 or 8 months. I don't think there's a standard. I like the canned on date. Let me know when it was packaged so I can figure out when I think, which, then you're putting a lot on the consumer to have a brain.
That's a big problem nowadays.
Yeah.
I actually like, and this might be just because of how I feel about, the Haze Boys right now, but when you put a can on date and that person sees it's been, 7 days, they go to the brewery and the can's 7 days old. It's like the end of the fucking world, because it's like, how dare you not give me a beer that was canned today, like literally off the canning line and into my fucking car. So I actually can appreciate this is a good way to combat it, to say it's best by this date, but we're not going to deal with that bullshit, because that's
the bottle we have. A best by date is October of 21. That's 9 months from today. So.
Marco, Haze Boys, they ain't drinking this shit. You know what I mean? No chance in hell.
Do you see how bright that is? I mean, you could read the newspaper through that.
Yeah, again, I mean, it's similar to the Boddingtons. I wonder if they're filtering. I mean, I know the Fuller, this is Fuller's, right? Am I crazy?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the Fuller's yeast is notorious for dropping clear. It drops like a brick, in fact.
Yeah.
It's the White Labs O2. It's almost every brewery uses this lab at some point, or every brewery uses this lab. Every brewery uses this yeast at some point, and it does drop. So I can see that clarity, but again, that's insane.
That's
clarity
filtration clear.
Yeah.
And so just going back to Haze Boys drinking these types of beer, our resident Haze Boy Joe I actually saw right before we jumped on today, he posted side-by-side photos on our Facebook page of his latest beers on draft. One of them was opaque as fuck, and the other one was which was his standard lactose New England IPA. I don't know if there's lactose in it, but I just assume everything he makes has lactose, and it's got to be lactose. And the other one was a Czech Pils that was crystal clear. So maybe it's just the home brewer thing. I'm sure that Czech Pils had lactose in it too, because it's just what he does. But there are some of those haze boys that'll do it, although they are few and far between.
Should we move on to the next beer?
Yeah, which one you want? Mine or yours?
We should do yours, because that's the direct comparison.
Sure.
Right? So first of all, yours is like flat as a board.
Sure. For you guys, mine is creamy AF, because I actually switched the sparkler on mine to the smallest hole, so I get that super creamy northern pour. Which anybody out there in listener land that now we're getting into cask speak. Sorry.
So your what yeast did you use for yours?
I used I think I used Imperial Pub. I was having a hard time finding.
That should be the fuller strain, right? Or am I wrong
actually,
about
that's the same. That's the ESB yeast. So that is the Fuller's yeast. Yeah.
Well, so here we go.
Pay attention.
You can compare the two. I mean, these should technically be the same yeast strains, maybe not, but like yours is definitely not as clear as a Fuller's. I mean, there's still a little bit.
I think in homebrew world that is pretty clear without putting gelatin in the beer. It's not super clear.
So yeah, I would say though that the beers smell totally different.
Yeah,
the aroma on them. I actually am Phil from yours. I'm getting almost like some roasted malt character in the aroma. So I'm not sure what your grain bill was there, but I definitely pick up on a roast character. The taste is, I'd put them in the same ballpark. Like I think there's some similarities there, but and this could be because of the lack of carbonation, because carbonation will certainly bring out some stuff.
Absolutely.
But the brightness that we talked about with the London Pride is missing in yours. Like yours is a pretty balanced, easy drinking bitter. It doesn't have as much bitterness, doesn't have as much of the floral, fruity character, doesn't have as much of the yeast esters. It's probably just a standard bitter, but the London Pride, you can tell, is just like that slight notch above in each one of the buttons.
This is probably a case for where homebrewers, use a piece of software like, say, Brewfather or Beersmith, and my calculation came out to about 34 IBUs on this. And this is a case where there's a bunch of experiments out there on Brewlosophy, but homebrewers don't get the same level of hop utilization as professional brewers do, no matter what Beersmith calculates out for you. And this is probably a pretty good example, because what I was shooting for was a very similar level of IBUs to London Pride, and it's clearly not there. And I don't use a hop filter. I don't use a hop screen. I don't have any of that. Just toss the hop pellets right in. 75-minute boil, so you would expect to nail your IBUs, but I just don't think homebrewers, and this isn't just me and just this one beer, that's kind of something I've noticed over the years, is homebrewers never get that level of hop utilization that you think you're getting.
And so why are we getting the roast in this?
So Crystal 80, Crystal 120, pale chocolate, those will all give you a little bit of roast.
And it almost has roasted malt, but also like a roasted coffee.
Yeah, so
that pale chocolate.
I completely agree with everything Marco just said, which is a fucking miracle, by the way.
That's a true story, and I'm glad this is being recorded, because this shit never happens.
This is evidence right here. But yeah, no, I think the pale chocolate was a mistake. I know that was in the recipe. Yeah,
that's in their recipe. Yeah.
I don't think it is, to be quite honest. I think I'd be shocked. Whatever they're using.
Send you the photograph. Yeah.
Okay.
No, they are probably buying custom roasted malts for them. They're not just going to the shelf like we are and just buying chocolate.
But I agree with Marco. Like, I get a roast coffee and it's very inappropriate for the style. I think that really blankets everything else that you have going on. I think everything else on the beer is great. It's a little wordy tasting and smelling.
Interesting. Okay.
Which I don't know if that's because it's young or packaging. I mean, I don't know. But other than that, I think Marco's right. I think you're on the right track. I think that a lot of the malt flavors are the same. It's the hops that are, I think it's where you're missing. Yeah. You're missing that punch.
I wonder if I'm missing, because I didn't use that North Down. That might be part of it.
North Down is supposed to be quite bitter. It comes across as quite bitter, and
That
kind of
might
can
be my
provide
problem.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know how hard it is to find Northdown around?
Don't even get me about Northdown. When I tried brewing this beer, I couldn't find Northdown. This was like 7 years ago. It's still impossible to find.
What's the ABV on yours, Phil?
It's just shy of 4, like 3.8, 3.9, something like that.
Oh wow, yours is that much lower then. Huh.
Yeah, it is a little bit lower. I didn't nail I've got that whole new setup, and I'm still dialing in my numbers, so I didn't nail what I was shooting for. I was shooting for about 4, so I was a little under, but honestly, from a cask ale perspective, I am happy with a 3.8, 3.9 beer. That's
absolutely.
Beer.
Yeah, I think a little carbonation go a long way for your beer. Yeah. And if you brewed it again, I'd eliminate the pale chocolate completely. Go with something else if you're convinced they have something, but
it's only about 1%. I'm surprised how much it cuts through.
I don't know. That was the first note I got was roasted coffee. Like it's really prominent both in the nose and the taste. It's pretty shocking, actually.
Yeah, well, I was really surprised, and it could be that we're doing a side by side with London Pride, that it just makes it that much more obvious.
Which, I mean, I haven't had the opportunity yet to try it side by side. I was kind of holding on to my bottles for today, so I'm very happy with the beer. I've definitely been waiting for February 1st for the end of dry month for me. This is work, but anyway,
you're out. 5 pints. Tonight. Dry week is over.
I got
dry week, dry month.
I don't know if you saw, but Mr. Lactus himself was doing dry January Heat Cape tonight as well. So you wouldn't be alone.
All right, let's move on to Nick's bitter.
Yeah, let's do it. So what's really interesting about this beer, so I just poured it off. So I don't know, we've talked about this, but all three of us, we recently purchased a beer engine, I don't know, like a month ago, maybe earlier.
Right before Christmas we got them.
Okay. And so we've been playing around with that. So I feel like my beer off my beer engine is going to taste different than the ones I bottled for you guys, because I did not bottle the beer engine itself. I bottled off a tap. So I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say. I'll just say my impressions about the beer. It's okay, but I think it definitely has some issues, and I'm welcome to some feedback because I'm trying to figure that out. Obviously, the recipe wasn't exactly what I had planned originally. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think about it.
So you said East Kent Goldings here?
Yep.
Because it is fruit forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like it's so fruity and floral. And even in the taste, I don't get any bitterness at all in this.
Okay.
And
maybe a hair of like a candied fruit.
Yeah, it is. I don't want to say it's sweet because I don't think it's sweet. But if it had sweetness to it, if it had sugar, it would be a really sweet, like fruity, sweet beer. But it's I get so much of that fruit forward hop character, which I'm surprised with East Kent Golding. I don't use it enough, but I didn't realize it would impart those types of characters.
You'd be surprised. East Kent Golding, a lot of people think of it as sort of floral herbal, but I actually get a lot of like dirty orange, almost bergamot out of it.
Oh, that is literally what I smell when I'm smelling this. Yeah, literally, yeah.
Yep. So, and like I said, this one was dry hop with half an ounce, so I'm not surprised it's really coming through.
I actually really enjoy it. It is so different than the other ones.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that the fruit character on it is so prominent that it needs a little bit more bitterness.
Okay.
What IBU did you hit with this?
Oh man, it's a really good question.
Because I feel like it's
not enough,
20 or less.
Okay, I want to say it's probably supposed to be 25 to 30, but I can't recall off the top of my head. I have to look.
Yeah, I'm gonna. At some point, I'm going to actually top off my Fuller's London Pride with yours, because I think if you blended them together, they're going to be really fucking good.
This is the advantage of pouring 5 beers at once. You can do some blending.
I want to be able to experiment a little bit. Because I actually really love that character that the East Kent Golding is giving, because I've not really played with it enough. So now it's got me thinking about stuff that I'd want to use it for. If you had that bit of bitterness to balance it out, this thing would be fucking awesome.
Good. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, East Kent Golding, it's sort of the gold standard as far as English beers. When you think of English beers, I feel like that's the first hop that comes to mind, and for good reason. there's just so much character to it, especially compared to something like Fuggles or Willamette, where it's more earthy or herbal. You get this fruity floral component with East Kent Goldings that is really hard to replicate. There's not too many hops. In fact, I think at one point I was looking for alternatives, and man, there really isn't. It's very unique for what it is.
And there's a few Goldings hops, right? There's East Kent Goldings, Styrian Goldings.
And that's a Slovenian hop, I believe. Yeah. And that's more common in they use it in English beers, but they use it a lot in, I think, Belgian beers as well.
Oh yeah, all right. So I did my blend here, and I did 2 fingers of each into a glass, and man, fire.
Yeah, it's good. I'm gonna do the same thing.
Yeah, like fire. Now this is what I'm talking about.
You know, speaking of like beer blending, I was watching a video recently of Alchemist. John Kimmick was talking about how they blend their batches of Heady Topper for consistency. I'm
not surprised at that, because batch to batch of Heady, it's basically the same beer all the time. I don't think it ever changes.
Yeah, it's pretty consistent. So for those out there, like, blending isn't even not that rare in the craft brewing world.
I have to say, this blend that you just suggested is a banger. Holy,
it is. Wow, so fucking good.
It's really good. It's really good.
Man, I got the best of both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of added that hop complexity to the London Pride, and the London Pride added the bitterness balance. It is fucking good. Damn.
Yeah, and London Pride, I mean, they use a really quite the mix of hops too. I forgot they use Target, Goldings, Challenger, and Northdown, so there's already a lot going on in that beer.
Phil, did you do this blend?
I did, yeah. Yeah, it is really good.
I'm just going to call myself a sommelier of beer now. What is that? I mean, I know that we have the fucking Cicerones, but
Master Blender.
Master Blender.
You are a Master Blender, yes. Yeah, it's really good. So yeah, overall, I mean, yeah, we've had some really great beers tonight, and I think it helps showcases the world of bitters out there. I mean, get out there and try these beers. They're incredible.
Yeah, we are speaking directly to the masses that are drinking these strictly dessert beers all the time, that you guys are really missing out if you're not taking the chance to start testing out these other styles of beer, because there's some really amazing stuff that's out there. Now, we showcase 3 commercial examples that you can get. 2 of these you can't. You can if you ask us nicely. Sure. But 2 exceptional classic examples of English bitters in the London Pride and the Boddingtons. So you guys can go out there and get them. They're really affordable. But the message here is just to get out there and step outside what you're drinking every single day and try something different. There's a lot of theory on your palate kind of getting stressed out or getting a little too used to the beers that you drink. So mixing up your styles will actually let you go back to those New England IPAs and those milkshake IPAs and probably enjoy them more because you allow your palate to sort of reset itself. But you're missing out if you're not trying these things. These beers are awesome. We love them. We're looking forward to do a lot more of this type of experiment with you guys and talking through a beer style where we blend the commercial examples with the homebrew examples, because this is a lot of fun. And I love just talking beer with you guys. And like I said earlier, I need reasons to drink 5 beers on a Monday night, and this is a great reason to do that.
All right, guys, thanks again for joining us for this first ever Bitter Off. We've got another one of these Beer Off episodes planned soon, so stay tuned for that. Next week on the show, we will have Brett back to finish the conversation into his journey as a pro brewer, and specifically we'll dig into his plans as a new home brewer. That's next week on Strike, Mash, Boil. The Strike, Mash, Boil podcast is produced by the Merrimack Valley Homebrew Club, an American Homebrewers Association sanctioned club. Follow us on Instagram at MVHBC. Join the conversation in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/MVHBC, and check out our website at mvhbc.com.